Today, Jesus is saying that you can have a blessed life even if counting your blessings is difficult, even if you try your hardest and you can't get past 3. Jesus says your life is still blessed. To help us understand these things, we're looking at this section of the Sermon on the Mount called the Beatitudes. 9 statements from Jesus where he talks about people who are blessed. And that word for blessed means, or can also have the connotation of being happy or having the attitude of happiness. Again, you have your idea of what makes you happy, but here Jesus is going to come along and say, blessed are those who mourn. You scratch your head and you say, really? Happy are the people who mourn? Jesus says, happy are the hungry. Happy are the insulted and the persecuted. And you can tell that Jesus is going to flip this idea upside down and rearrange our thinking on the matter. So let's take a look. The first beatitude, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. And that word for blessed has connotations of begging for something or lacking something. And we can all have in our minds what it is like to be poor in material things, or being materialistically poor. We can understand what that looks like, but here Jesus says, blessed are the poor in spirit. Now, what does that mean? Well, he once told a parable about someone who was looked up to in the religious community, a Pharisee, and he also told the same parable about a man who was looked down upon as a lowly sinner, a tax collector. And those weren't just the opinions that other people had about them, these were opinions that they had about themselves. So the Pharisee stands up in front of church and he says, God, I thank you that I'm not like other people, that I do good things, that I don't do too many bad things, certainly not as many bad things as that sinner tax collector does back there. And the tax collector is kind of in the back, he's looking down at the ground, he beats himself in the chest and he says, Lord, have mercy on me, a sinner. And Jesus kind of rearranges the thinking of his listeners. He says that man, the one who's looked down at as a sinner, the one who knows that he needs mercy and forgiveness, he's the one that goes home justified before God. Reminds me of a rich man who ran for president. I'm not going to say his name because the name isn't important. I just want you to hear the statement and evaluate it from there. When he was running for president, at one point he made a remark that sounded something to the effect of, I've never had to ask God for forgiveness. And interviewer asked him about that comment, and he said, can you elaborate a little bit more? And he said, well, I have a great relationship with God. I do lots of things that are good. I don't do too many things that are bad, so I don't really need to ask for forgiveness. And that's the attitude that a lot of people have. That they think that they are spiritually rich, and they act like they are spiritually rich, that they think that their relationship with God is great. But Jesus says, if that's your attitude, you're like that Pharisee in the parable. The one who does not go home with a right relationship with God. Instead, we should be like that tax collector, the one who pulls out his pockets and realizes that spiritually he has nothing to offer God, only to ask for God's grace and mercy and forgiveness, to beg God for that grace, to realize that we are lacking something, that we would be totally poor if left on our own. Instead, we need God's grace and his gospel, his promises and his love. That's what it means to be poor in spirit. And Jesus says, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. The second beatitude, blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Well, what is there to mourn? Oh, so many things in this life. Loss and pain and grief. But keeping in mind what Jesus just said about the spiritual nature of the kingdom, let's think about this in terms of someone who is mourning for spiritual reasons. Grief over what they've done. Looking at their life and the mess that they've made of things because of their own choices and their actions, and not knowing what to do with that guilt causes us to mourn. Jesus says, "Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted." They will be comforted. Of course, in the future, when God wipes every tear from our eyes in heaven, where we're in that place where there is no more death or mourning or crying or pain, we will be comforted in that way. But why wait for eternity? Be comforted now when you hear Jesus say to you, "Take heart, your sins are forgiven."